Let's touch briefly on a United Nations report which came out yesterday saying the impact of humans on the natural world is putting the survival of 1 million different species at risk. For more on this and why it might be a problem, I'm joined now by the founder and chairman of the independent climate change think tank E3G, Tom Burke. He's also a former government advisor on the environment as well. Tom, morning. What can you tell me about this report?
Well, this is a United Nations study that's the equivalent of the studies that have led us to really understand how much damage we're doing to the climate. We're now getting the same sort of picture about the scale and urgency of the way in which we're degrading the natural resource foundations of our economy.
Why have we as a species done this?
We've done it in part because we've pursued lots of perfectly understandable goals like our food and energy in ways that are just very wasteful and very ignorant about the need to retain the foundations of that economy. So the natural environment supplies us with everything we have in our economy that isn't supplied by minerals and non-fossil fuels.
Right.
But we've been so careless about the way in which we've used those resources that we've now degraded that resource foundation.
Right, and this of course it is a conversation about resources, but not directly, because what this study talks about is the million species which are being driven to extinction by the actions of humans. I mean, we've got 1 million to talk about, but what sort of species are we talking about, and which are the ones that are especially significant?
Oh, we're talking about literally all the species, but of course the ones that come to mind immediately when you say that are the big charismatic things like the mammals and the birds. But actually the damage we're really doing that matters most is to things like bees, which we need to pollinate our plants, or other insects. The damage we're doing to fungi, which actually maintain the sort of health of our soil. There's a whole lot of species, most of which nobody would know the name of, but actually are all part of the web of life that sustains our ability to take food from them, and then also provide a whole series of other services. The fact that forests not only provide us with wood, but actually they help prevent flooding, and all of these, as we cut trees down, we do lots of more damage simply than not just getting rid of the species, as it were, but also destroying that web of life that sustains us.
There's a quote in my mind just now which might be both wrong and misattributed. Maybe you can correct me on this, but was it Einstein who said, once the bees go, humanity has 4 years? I'm paraphrasing, but was it him? Is that roughly correct?
I don't know whether it was something Einstein said, but the bees are, as we've begun to discover, much more essential to being able to feed mankind than we ever realized. And that's why there's been such a row over the use of pesticides called neonicotinoids, which are clearly having a part to play in the big collapse of bee populations all over the world.
And presumably the use of that particular chemical is easily avoidable, is it?
Yes. The first thing we should do about this problem is stop doing really bad things, like continuing to pollute the environment with very active synthetic biological compounds that destroy life, and not only destroy other species, but make life difficult for us. There's increasing concern about the spread of hormone mimics or hormone into the environment that begin to disrupt the endocrine systems of human beings. So there's a whole range of problems, all of which are contained in this report.
And as I say, if it's possible to quite easily avoid using that particular chemical, are there other changes that as a species we could make relatively easily, relatively quickly? And if so, why aren't we?
Well, I think that the thing... Do you remember when we're at the Olympics, we were dominant in the cycling, and that was explained because we were very good at the aggregate of marginal improvements, and that's what gave us dominance. Well, what we're seeing here is the aggregate of marginal damage. So it's not big sort of silver bullets that we're looking for. It's looking for us to change all sorts of things in small ways that would make it, but the total would make life much more viable on the planet.
There is perhaps one really strong striking statistic here, other than the fact that 1 million species are being driven to the verge of extinction. The world's population, in more or less the time that I've been alive, I was born in 1973, since 1970, the world's population has doubled. Now, I would have said, if you'd asked me, by how much has the world's population grown in the time I'd been alive, I would say it's maybe gone up by a fifth or 20% perhaps, or 25%, something like that. I would never have said it would have doubled. That is an astonishing statistic. Does that show to you the kind of pressure that the species is under, simply because there are now so many of us?
It's more than that. I think that statistic somewhat underestimates it, because every single one of the nearly 8 billion people on the planet now has a lot more impact because of our ability with technology to, as it were, increase our impact of everything we do. So you can imagine each one of those individuals has a much greater impact now than they had in 1970s. So it's actually that number itself understates the scale of the impact of population increase.
Do we need to have fewer children?
I think, of course, we do across the planet. We need to slow that down, but we've actually been very successful at doing that. In most parts of the world now, population growth is slowing and stalling. In some parts of the world, like parts of Africa, where the population isn't beginning to fall. And what we discovered was that the key thing to getting population down was to educate women and girls and give them control.
And to give them power over their own fertility.
And that's actually worked to a much greater extent than people anticipated. There's still work to do on that front, but in a way it's not so much the number of people that matters as the impact those people have on the planet. And what we've been doing, in a sense, is using a lot of the technical capabilities we now have carelessly, instead of putting a bit more thought into it, and using all that cleverness and knowledge and innovation we've got to maintain that resource base, just like any other. You maintain any other asset you have. If you buy a car or a house, you take care to protect the asset value of that house. We're simply not taking enough care of the asset value of nature.
And something else that I've picked up on here from this study, cities have expanded rapidly. The number of urban areas on the planet doubling since 1992, people moving to cities from rural areas. That's inevitable as well, isn't it? Because people, I moved from a small rural part of the Highlands to London and Edinburgh. And that's not uncommon. People generally want to move from a small place to a big place. Not everybody, but that is always going to be the trend, isn't it?
Yeah, and that in itself has got some upsides as well as downsides, because if you, as long as you don't replace the people who move off the into the big cities with industrialized agriculture or palm oil plantations, then you allow nature to come back. And what's really extraordinary, and we see that from the whole discussion of rewilding, how quickly nature can come back if we give it a chance. So there's an enormous amount we can do to deal with this problem, but we've got to think about how we do things, and we've got to be prepared, as the report says, to transform the way, not the way we live so much as the way we do things.
All right, Tom, thank you. Tom Burke is the founder and chairman of the independent climate change think tank E3G, and also a former government advisor on the environment as well.